the UN's report, Canadians need us to come together and do our part to prevent catastrophic climate change. It's very simple. Will the Liberals do the work and agree that we need to have a debate about this in this House?
Canadians know, Mr. Speaker, that the time is urgent in terms of concrete steps that governments can take in partnership with industry and citizens. The measures that we have proposed over the last number of years and that we are in the process of putting into place are good for the Canadian economy, will create good middle-class jobs, and will also deal with the challenge of climate change head-on.
MPs are holding an emergency debate at this hour over climate change. Both the NDP and the Green Party asked for one. They point to a recent report from the United Nations warning of what the UN calls catastrophic consequences of increased global warming. So what would the NDP do to curb emissions? Joining me now is NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. Hi, Mr. Singh. Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming back on.
Hey, Vashi, it's a pleasure.
So you say today in asking for the emergency debate that the Liberals' plan will not meet the government's own targets, let alone those laid out by the IPCC. So what is the NDP's plan? What would you do differently?
Well, first off, we wouldn't be buying a leaky pipeline, spending $4.5 billion of public dollars on it at the time when the Liberal government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau campaigned on ending fossil fuel subsidies. They're not only buying this pipeline, but from the estimates, it looks like the $7 billion to build the expansion is now ballooned to $9 billion and maybe as high as $15 billion. So all told, we might be as a nation $20 billion into subsidizing the fossil fuel sector at a time when the IPCC report from the United Nations states that we need to do something bold and dramatic to reduce our emissions before 2030. That's not the path that Canadians want to see our country go down, and they certainly don't want to see us be spending $20 billion potentially on subsidizing the fossil fuel sector. Instead, we should be investing in clean energy. We should be investing in clean energy jobs, the green economy, sustainable jobs. I've done tours across this country and seen the amazing potential we have in Canada, and we should invest in those opportunities, which would both reduce our emissions but also create great jobs.
I want to be specific, though, because what the IPCC is saying is that essentially, if you do the calculations for Canada, even beyond what the government has currently set, they would need to cut an extra 127 million tons of emissions. So what would you do? I mean, I take your point about investing in green infrastructure and green energy jobs, but will that get you 127 million tons of emissions?
Right. So what we need to do is the current plan, the current target that we're on track for is about 512 megatons. That's what the current targets are. But we're actually nowhere near even achieving that target. What the IPCC is recommending is we need to get more like 388 megatons. Now, to achieve that, one of the things is the government's current targets. They've complained a lot about the Harper and the Conservative government saying that the Conservative government, they don't have a plan. That's true. But what the Liberals are doing is they're using the Harper Conservative era targets. So they're absolutely not going to be achieving what the IPCC is recommending if they're using the Harper targets. So one, we've got to have better targets. But two, it's not enough to have a good target, a target that would help us achieve our goal if there's no enforcement. So we need accountability. The government actually has to make a commitment and then follow through on that commitment. We've seen this government make commitments, but they just break them. So we need some accountability. So we need a bold plan. We need to have some vision around how we can actually achieve these targets and have accountability for them. And that's why today's emergency debate is so important. Canadians are hoping that our government will do its part to tackle this really existential question, this major issue that's threatening humankind. We've got to do everything we can to tackle climate change. According to this report, this is crucial. It is a point at which we need to act very seriously.
But with respect, you're telling me what the government isn't doing. What will the NDP do? What is your bold plan to get to those targets, whether they be the ones that are set now or the increased ones that you'd like to see? For example, do you support a carbon tax or the price on carbon?
Well, let me begin with what I've said very concretely. One is that $20 billion of investment that this government's potentially going to put towards the fossil fuel sector, that's going to take us away from achieving our goals. That's $20 billion that we could direct into directly reducing emissions through various programs, through supporting industries and through supporting different transitionary methods to make sure that we actually reduce our emissions. The other thing we can do is some of the things I propose. There's cities, municipalities, one that I visited in Quebec, that have taken the initiative to implement a green energy strategy where they use waste products that are produced in that city. They've used it now to convert into natural gas, which has reduced their emissions significantly for the city. They use that natural gas to fuel vehicles and to heat buildings. Now, if municipalities had other projects similar of this nature, what I announced in Quebec was the NDP is prepared to have a fund that would support municipalities who want to proceed with green energy projects or renewable energy projects that would reduce their carbon emissions.
How much would that cut carbon emissions by?
Well, what we need to do is have a full plan. So this is one strategy. Another strategy that I've promoted and proposed is we're leading edge in terms of electrification of transport. Quebec actually has some of the most cutting edge technology around the electrification. We know that the transportation accounts for a significant portion of our emissions. If we could speed up the electrification of transport, which many sectors in Quebec are doing right now, that would be another way for us to reduce emissions. So I proposed a fund to work in collaboration with Quebec to support the acceleration of the electrification of transport, which would significantly also reduce
by how much?
That's going to be another significant component. But what else we need to do is...
But by how much? You have to understand why I'm asking the question, because there are specific numbers that you're saying we need we need better targets, more aggressive targets. And so I'm saying, how much is your plan going to, how will it get us there?
Well, we have to look at all the different options we've put on the table. I've put on the table using those $20 billion. I've put on the table looking at supporting municipalities that need to transition towards green energy projects. I've put on the table supporting our transition to the electrification. We also need to be investing in a national transit strategy to get people into public transit. We also proposed, and an idea that we've proposed before and continue to advance, is retrofitting buildings. Buildings are having a significant carbon footprint, and we can reduce that carbon footprint if we fund retrofits that reduce the amount of carbon footprint that each building has. These are some of the strategies, and what we would propose doing is implementing these strategies, none of which the government's actually implementing. These are bold strategies that would actually make significant difference. We need to try. This government's not even trying. They're not even putting forward any concrete efforts. Would you increase the government's carbon tax?
Would you increase the government's carbon tax? There is a school of thought out there that says, $50 a ton isn't enough to get us to the targets. Would you increase it beyond $50 a ton?
Well, actually, we'll come out with our strategy around the carbon tax. But what's clear is absolutely we need a price on carbon. That is one strategy that has worked in the past. But I'm proposing some of the ideas that we believe in that will actually bring down those emissions.
But there is a huge debate right now.
Change the direction of our country. Right now, we're seeing what this government's doing. This government is taking us down a path with one single action. They're going to increase our emissions by 128 megatons. They're going to increase our emissions exactly what they promised to reduce it by when they made the Paris Accord. So they're taking steps that are going to significantly increase our emissions without taking any concrete steps to decrease them.
Well, they have taken a concrete step of imposing they will impose a carbon tax in January 2019. I'm asking you, is the level at which they're going to impose that satisfactory? Will the NDP increase it? Is there a $100 carbon tax coming under an NDP government? Should that be the outcome of the next federal election?
Well, what we need to look at is, with a carbon tax, the problem that often happens with the current method that the government's using is they don't take into consideration a mechanism to support everyday people and make sure that those who are contributing the most to pollution are paying their fair share. So there's a strategy brought forward by the NDP in Saskatchewan which proposes doing exactly that, where we can actually help out everyday folks and reduce or put the pressure in terms of those who pollute the most and encourage them to pay their fair share so that the highest polluters are the ones who are reducing their emissions. We've proposed a lot of ideas. Actually, we've talked a lot of the ideas right now. These are the things we need to see happen. What we're not seeing happen is the current government doing anything concrete right now to reduce emissions. We've got an environmental commissioner. You don't have to trust my word for it. The environmental commissioner came out a year ago and said very clearly that after 3 years, this government has done nothing significant to reduce emissions. So that's not good enough, given what the United Nations has just released, given the report that we've just heard.
I take your
none
point,
of this is good enough. This government is not fulfilling their commitment at all.
And I have questioned Minister McKenna at length about what you're talking about, but I'm here to ask you about what the NDP will do, and you haven't really answered the question.
I have actually. I've given you a significant
have you ruled out increasing that? No, I'm asking about carbon tax specifically.
I've told you my plan.
You said you support it.
I'm giving you my plan. I'm telling you the electrification vehicles and supporting that. I've talked about a fund to support municipalities transitioning towards reducing their carbon footprint. I've talked about a retrofit. These are real plans, Vashi. I mean, I'm giving you concrete steps that would actually reduce
you to
emissions.
the IPCC
These are
targets?
real steps. These are real concrete steps that this government has not done. These are steps that this government hasn't proposed.
But can you guarantee that would make sure Canada hits those IPCC targets?
I'm telling you very clearly that the current path that we're on with this government is the Liberal government is not achieving those goals. Their targets are too low. Their targets are not being enforced. And I'm saying what a New Democrat government would do is, one, impose targets that are importantly going to achieve our goals, and secondly, have some accountability so we don't just put out a target without actually following through on it. These are some concrete things that we need to do. We wouldn't be purchasing a pipeline. These are concrete differences. We would be reinvesting that money into initiatives to reduce emissions. These are concrete solutions to the problem. I'm giving you the solutions. More importantly, it doesn't matter about me and this issue. This is what Canadians want. Canadians don't want to see us spending money on a pipeline. Canadians want to see us invest in green energy. Canadians believe that this government is not doing enough. Environmentalists believe that this government is not doing enough. We're going to make sure this government does what it promised to do, what it needs to do, so that we do our part as a country to stand up to the growing threat, the catastrophic threat of climate change. We need to do more.
Okay, I'm out of time, Mr. Singh, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.